Housemarque looks to have struck gold again with Returnal, an atmospheric, horror-infused shooter that has dominated my attention since I loaded it up. But how does the shooter fare on the PlayStation 5 hardware, considering it is a PS5 exclusive? To talk about the gameplay, the tech, the performance in this excellent title, I'm joined by my friend and colleague, John Linneman. How you doing there, John?
Oh, pretty good, Alex, and I am excited to talk about this. In fact, this is typically the kind of game I would have covered myself because I love this kind of stuff, but I've been busy on DF Retro, which is a very nice thing.
Yeah, that is a very nice change of pace, I think, too.
Absolutely.
I'm covering this. I'm not into, playing on consoles myself, but this game is just kind of a surprise. And one of the things that surprises me about it is actually kind of the gameplay itself and the genre that I would put this game into. To describe it really with like a little bit of bullet points here, it's like a bullet hell shooter. So there's tons of enemy shots going throughout the air that you have to dodge. It has Metroid-like design where you're going from area to area, unlocking new areas via power-ups and kind of backtracking. It has roguelike death mechanics where, the kind of point of the game is dying constantly and then starting up again and trying to achieve some level of persistence between deaths. But then also it has this psychological horror element and a body horror element due to the kind of weird designs and alien life forms in this universe. It's super intense and very, very interesting to play through. I'm pretty happy with the way this game is.
Yeah, I was going to say, when we were talking about this beforehand, I just started playing it last week as well, and I haven't had as much time as I'd like, but I really like what I've experienced. But you said... And you don't play games on consoles ever, except for work. But in this case, you're just like, you know what? I actually kind of want to keep playing this game.
Yeah, I did
just to see where it goes, which is the ultimate praise coming from you. And yeah,
it's really awesome. Just some other cool things to talk about. I think the aesthetic in this game that we're going to talk about more in depth due to the kind of graphical presentation, but it is hitting a lot of those notes that you see all throughout sci-fi, like the history of the Alien franchise with Prometheus, with H.R. Giger inspired designs. You also have some moments depending upon kind of the zone you're in that look like Beksinski paintings. You also have I don't know how to explain it, but a combination of
sphere.
Yeah, sphere. Well, there's this scene here. I mean, come on. The inspiration's right there. In terms of what's going on in the story, you get Solaris elements.
Oh, yeah.
It reaches so deep into all this really great history of sci-fi while being its own in its own way. And the best part is it's a bullet hell shooter, but at the same time, I'm genuinely creeped out by this game. So I just want everyone in the audience to know that this game is really well done beyond all the technical aspects that I'm just about to talk into that amplify that design. But this is a game that should definitely be on your radar. But let's get into the graphics here.
Sure, let's do it.
Housemarque's known for its arcade-style games, and in the past, on last-gen consoles, a lot of particle effects on the PlayStation platforms. They had Resogun.
Resogun was launched, and that did a lot of amazing stuff with particles. And one of my favorites, though, was Nex Machina, which I think used the SDF voxels to sort of have this destructible terrain effect. And you're kind of chipping away at the scenery and particles everywhere, and it was a really beautiful, very fun game.
It totally is. And this builds, I think, a lot on that in terms of visual and graphical design is what's going into the engine. The engine here is Unreal Engine 4, but in terms of the way they're using it, either they're using their own particle system or they've built on kind of the way the GPU particles and Niagara system works in UE4 to really just go full out with the amount of particles that are going on here. Just a great example is any of the fights that are happening in the game. Whether your weapon's discharging, with the bullet hell element, enemies are shooting either quads or massive spheres of kind of energy attacks at you, and you're dodging around them. But your own weapons too have tons of secondary attacks and secondary kind of particles coming off of them, and it just creates this extremely hectic visual scape that you have to kind of juggle around and dance around to make sure you don't get hit, because not getting hit in the game is a pretty big deal because you have this low health pool, as well as you not getting hit, much like in a shooter, make sure that all your bonuses, your damage bonuses, are still applying.
I was really impressed with how they utilize this, because their games have typically used sort of a pulled back arcade style camera system, but this one is more traditional, or like not traditional, but modern, if you will, where it's a right stick camera, third person action game.
Yeah.
But they really managed to integrate this stuff into the core gameplay loop in a way that doesn't feel out of place. And instead, it's really quite impressive to behold.
You also have these kind of, like you were describing in Nex Machina, the kind of environment being destructible too. There is a bit of that here that I think looks really cool. A lot of the game's statues or plinths or kind of obelisks are all actually destructible, and they kind of break apart. They kind of dissolve quickly into the ether, but when they're breaking apart, they're like very physicalized, tons of little bits of dust or bits of rocks blowing up in their wake, and it just looks awesome. And the particles are kind of going, every single action you can do in the game has something to do with particles, I noticed. you open a door, and in the wake of the door, like the settled dust, this alien civilization has been, on this planet and been dead for a long time. All the settled dust there like moves in the wake of the door opening in a really cool looking way. There's these kind of matter translocators that you use to kind of traverse the scene in like one area, or you use them to fast travel across the one level you're in already. And both effects, versions of this, like the short range matter transport as you turn into like constituent particles and then kind of get blasted around the scene as energy, which looks really cool. Or you have the large range matter translocation, where your entire body once again dissolves into particles, but it looks almost like something out of like this 90s CGI look where every little particle looks like a tiny, perfectly rendered 3D sphere that has like lighting applied to it and like actual depth, which you wouldn't usually really see, I think, with most GPU particles. I do really wonder if they're using their own system here. It's really hard to tell, but it's just amazing. And one of my favorite actually particle effects that I found in the game is, I don't want to spoil too much because there's actually really, really good stuff that I don't want to talk about here, but one of the enemies I get into contact with and had to fight and destroy turned into like rubble after they kind of died. And you could walk through this rubble and you could see it like moving around your character. The particles in this game are so intense. It's really what gives this game its look, and I can't really hype it up enough. It's really awesome.
Yeah, and the fact that they're delivering all of this, and we'll get to the performance in general, but it's targeting 60 frames per second.
Oh, yeah.
So it all just looks unbelievably smooth in motion. Seeing all those particles swirl everywhere. It's very, very impressive. I agree.
Yeah. Another aspect of this is that's the kind of bullet hell visual aspect. Another technological thing that they're taking advantage of really nicely in UE4 here is UE4 has a lit frustum aligned voxel fog, as it's called.
Oh, yeah.
And here they tend to really use it for kind of intense beams of light going throughout every arena, like on the first level or even on the second level, as well as they really like to use this kind of, I would say, alien hatchery inspired ankle or knee deep high height fog.
Yes, I love the height fog. That looks so good.
That is also lit, and it really is really cool. I love when games take advantage of like frustum aligned voxel fog in this way, and they do it incredibly well here.
That's kind of my takeaway here, is that they're using a tried and true technique here, but it's the way that their artists utilize this to such great effect that impresses me the most. It's very, very atmospheric and just beautiful, the scenes that they created with it. Plus all the other atmospheric effects that you'll see throughout. There's tons of dust and there's rain and just blowing foliage and there's just so much stuff that's always happening on screen. Yet the game has this really dark aesthetic that almost makes it difficult to really parse what you're seeing as far as like a typical render. Like your eyes just see this like weird alien looking like area in front of you. Like it's really, really just beautiful to behold.
It's really, really well done. A nice part of this too, I think, that sells that alien look and feel to everything is the audio design.
Oh yeah.
Which I did mention the game is a bullet hell game, and you would actually think like a driving soundtrack, like really funny pew pew effects and things like that due to a bullet hell game, but no. The game's soundscape is like a horror film. Enemy reaction sounds are terrifying, really unnerving, and the sound mix in the game with the environmental audio, with like the rain and the wind and the creaking, It is really creepy.
Yeah, I'm playing it in 7.1 as well, and it's just they do an awesome job with the surround channels. It's a very active mix, and they layer that in with the musical score, which is also very, very atmospheric. I love it.
And then on top of this, though, you have gun sounds, which are really punchy and gave me some sort of like, I don't know how to explain it, but like high-end Matrix sounds. They're really intense.
They're like weirdly different, I guess, than what we usually hear for gun sounds, and you combine that with the punchy nature of the mixing, and it just has a unique feel to it. Just using the weapons sounds great.
You have like a variety of weapons in the game, and some of them are very much so Giger-esque kind of alien bits that you shoot. But I actually prefer to use the default pistol with this like lightning secondary attack. And the way that sounds when you use it, it's like the sky opening kind of sound. It's amazing.
This is probably a good point to very quickly touch on the DualSense controller function.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
Because I actually felt that this added significantly to the game. Essentially, the secondary fire. So you have the typical aiming down sight function mapped to the left trigger. You pull it, you aim down sights. But they kind of simulated using the motors, I guess you could say the function that was embedded into the GameCube triggers, where you have a button beneath the analog pull. But they essentially, when you first pull the trigger, it sort of stops halfway down, and there's like this tension from the motor, and that's your regular aiming down sights. But if you put pressure on it and pull it all the way in, that switches to your secondary attack. And so there's just something about that trigger pull that I thought was really well done, and like more so than most other games that have used the controller thus far. And it's very clever because it keeps you from having to change trigger buttons or anything like that. It just kind of feels like a different function of an alien weapon. On top of that, they actually seem to make pretty good use of the rumble features combined with the sound from the controller. That reminded me of what they did with Astrobot, like Astro's Playroom, where it's like it has this feeling of like when there's like dust and sand kind of hitting around you, the player, you kind of like get a little bit of sense of that through the controller as well, which I enjoyed.
Yeah, it's like the rain pitter patter.
Yes, exactly.
Like the thing you'll notice right away. You're like, oh, my hands are constantly being rumbled. So it is pretty cute. I do like the double action trigger thing. The one thing that kept tripping me up though is this has not really to do with that, but the game does have an active reload system essentially.
Oh, yeah.
But it's the same button. It's not a different reload button. It's the same button as shooting. So sometimes if you're like being overly, I would say, happy with the trigger while shooting, you may mess up your active reload really easily. So you gotta change the way you play this game. Don't think about it as your traditional third-person shooter. Getting into one last aspect of the visuals, I noticed that the kind of blog entry on this game, I think on the PS blog website, did mention ray trace lighting in some capacity. It wasn't very visible in game though. Upon my inspection, I kind of just wanted to guess that it was something similar to RTX GI, which is more of a rasterization technique that uses ray tracing to kind of speed up visibility queries. So we asked Housemarque for clarification here, and they basically said that they use hardware RT to accelerate global illumination queries. So it is using RT, but it's using it for something that does not drive the game's visuals, but just kind of accelerates the game's rendering speed.
That's the thing, though, is nothing really stood out specifically as using ray tracing, but it does have this very cohesive look in a way that nothing really felt out of place per se.
Yeah, it's not something that seems to be very visual, but it's appreciated, I guess. Now let's get to, after all these kind of grossly positive impressions, I'd say the only slightly negative impression coming off of this release, at least in its current standpoint and the way we played the game up to this date right before release, was the game's image quality. So the game outputs at 4K and it uses 4K TAA upsampling. So that means you're looking at technically at an internal resolution that's lower than 4K, but TAA is kind of making the image look more like 4K over time. When playing the game, you may notice that, so you're like walking around, you may notice like some of the plants that are moving back and forth look kind of blurry. That's probably because TAA upsampling can only do so much for something like plants to make them look 4K-like. Or another aspect is you'll see is that like you'll look at a texture that is like very, I would say specular, like very shiny. Like you can see that on water as well too. And it may look like the internal resolution of that texture doesn't look 4K-like, essentially. And the reason for this happening, based upon what I've seen in the screenshots that I've counted, is that the internal resolution that TAA is upsampling from seems to be around 1080p-ish when I did kind of look at it.
Those are just my counts, though. When asking Housemarque for clarification on what the resolution setup is here, they maintained that temporal anti-aliasing is used to construct a 1440p image and checkerboarding brings it up to 4K. But still, when you do the count, it does actually count internally to 1080p.
You know, this kind of image quality, it can look rather grainy or fuzzy in motion due to this TAA upsampling. And you can get some kind of like artifacts essentially from that. But it can look very clean. Some edges can look very clean. It's just they can't be moving.
That's kind of the key, is the edges of objects look relatively clean and more 4K-like, but it's the in-surface areas that sort of exhibit noticeable artifacts, especially as you showed with a screenshot here, areas with a lot of specular lighting on it. It really sort of, you get this kind of pixelated, chunky look within the surface.
Yeah. In the end, though, I mean, I think the game's performance speaks more than its image quality, which is what I want to talk about next.
So here, these performance metrics that I'm just about to mention are with the day one patch installed. So it'll be as representative as possible for what you, the normal player, might experience while playing your game. But it must be said that this game does have a roguelike element. So depending upon the tile set and the enemies you're facing, or just exactly what you're doing, you may experience different performance profile than I am showing here. But let's get into that performance.
Essentially, the game is targeting 60 FPS at this, resolution, upsampled 4K TAA, and it is generally, I would say, it's hard to put a number on it because I have so many hours of footage here, but it is really hitting it for most of the gameplay that you're going to be playing at.
It's about as locked as like a 60 frames per second console game really is, I guess you could say. It's very, very stable.
It's very, very stable. The thing is, the game has a semi-random generation element, as well as the fact that enemies you fight have different attack schemes, and you can encounter different enemies in different arenas every single time you play the game. So I can't actually say what is representative for every player out there, but I did notice drops that can occur, and some of them are that will happen depending upon the tile set you're in. Like here, I get into a fight in this tile set with like this like long range look through a lot of geometry and a lot of foliage, and as soon as the particle effects from enemies start happening, that's when the frame rate started to dip into like the mid and low 50s, depending upon what was happening. I saw this happen as well in this arena right here, which you can see kind of when enemies get close to me, or when I discharge any of my particles while looking in a certain direction, or their particle effects combined with mine. Just kind of like the effects-based work in the more demanding looking arenas can drop performance as of this kind of day one patch. Another drop that I think a lot of players will experience, and that I experienced in my play, was essentially this game has these kind of Metroid Prime style doors that open up, and if you do run through them really quickly, or you're traversing the level really quickly, or you just happen to open a door, occasionally they will drop a frame when you get close to the door, like 133.3 millisecond frame, or it can even be higher. It just depends, and it looks like kind of like loading is happening that causes a hitch. Speaking of loading, the game basically doesn't really have any kind of, due to its design. It's constantly, like if you matter translocate to a different part of the same level, it's small fade to black, more or less instantaneous. If you matter translocate to a different level, like a different biome, it's a quick 1 second fade to white essentially, and that's about it. So loading is something you really don't actually have to worry about at all.
Awesome.
In general, looking at the kind of whole package in the here at the end, I would describe it as a brilliantly designed game with wonderful atmospherics and really great particle effects. The only real detriment really being the image quality at times due to the kind of way it's upsampling, but the performance holds out in the end, and that's what's most.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is Housemarque made the right choices here. They favor performance and these fancy particles and just the overall like look of the game over just targeting a high pixel count. And in the end, it looks excellent in motion.
And I do hope everyone in the audience checks it out if they can, because you may be surprised. If you did like games like Control, or if you like games like Metroid Prime, you probably will like this one.
Yeah, like I still have to play a lot, but it's very promising, and I have a feeling this could become one of the stars of the next generation.
I really, really enjoy it. But John, thank you so much for joining me and talking to me about Housemarque's Returnal.
But of course.
And if you did like this video and found it informative, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you're already a subscriber, hit that little bell in the corner to be informed as soon as Digital Foundry posts a video. If you want to help us out, support Digital Foundry on Patreon to get this content and years worth of our videos in high quality for download. If you want to talk to me or John about Returnal, write a comment below or follow us all and DF on Twitter. As always, this is Alex saying Auf Wiedersehen und...
And I hope you Returnal to the channel for more videos.